Today's lecture will be about plant reproduction. The image that you see here, which is on page 4 of your note booklet, shows the plant life cycle from 2 gametes or sperm and egg all the way through becoming an adult plant. We will start with those gametes down here. Right, so this is where our sperm and egg are going to be produced or already are produced. And when sperm and egg come together, we get fertilization, and that will create a zygote. So that's, in a seed plant, that would be the seed. And that will grow into the adult, which is called the sporophyte. Now this is where it gets kind of confusing. The sporophyte is like the adult plant that we see that produces spores. Because in plants, we talked about how non-vascular plants reproduce with spores. So do vascular plants, except their spores might develop into sperm and egg, which will then become seeds. So it can be a confusing process. So on this side here, you see this is the diploid. That's 2N, meaning it has 2 full sets of chromosomes. And so this side is what we would consider like the adult side, right? Or we have the zygote. Once the fertilization has taken place, that seed will develop into an adult, and then it will go through meiosis where it creates spores, which are haploid. Those become the gametophyte, which is a structure that produces gametes. So they just have some extra structures that we don't typically think of in animals, which is what can be kind of confusing about it. 2 words that are new here are sporophyte and gametophyte. And the main thing that you need to understand with the sporophyte is that the sporophyte produces spores. The gametophyte produces the gametes, right? So it's in the name. A sporophyte produces spores, gametophyte produces gametes. And that is going to help you to understand that process a little bit more. Here are the definitions for those 2 terms. These are also available for you in Schoology in the vocab. The sporophyte, as I said earlier, is a diploid individual, so it has a full set of chromosomes, but it produces spores, which are haploid. That's this structure here. So this is a real example of a plant that has the sporophyte we can see, and those are going to produce spores, which will develop into the gametophyte, and then the gametophyte will produce the gametes, the sperm and the egg, which will eventually unite in fertilization and create the sporophyte. In flowering plants, reproduction involves pollination and fertilization. We talked a lot about this yesterday. This is just a recap. Pollination is when the pollen from the anther is transferred to the stigma of the pistil, the female part of the flower. This can happen through wind pollination, which is often the case in gymnosperms. It can also happen with pollinators, as we talked about yesterday, with bees and other organisms that are pollinators. Once pollination has taken place, fertilization is the next step, where the sperm travels to the egg and the sperm and the egg unite. Once that has taken place, the ovule, where that sperm had gotten to, becomes the seed. So a seed is the future generations of that plant. It's going to contain the future life of that plant. And when we plant it and it grows, that's where that's coming from. There are many methods that seeds can be dispersed, but they do need to be spread out. And we talked a little bit about this in the note video yesterday as well. They can be moved by wind or animals, and that's going to be important to get that seed away from the parent plant. So I'm not going to go over that too much there. On page 5 of your notes, you see that there is 3 boxes for dormancy, germination, and meristems. Here you'll be able to complete the boxes on dormancy and germination. So dormancy, if you would just write underneath that word, hibernation. This is a state of hibernation of the seed. This is when the seed is not actively growing, it's just a seed, but it still has the potential for life. Germination is when that embryo or that seed starts to grow and actually becomes the new plant. Okay, so germination, you should write beginning growth. Right, so dormancy is when that seed is just in the hibernation period. When that seed starts to actually grow, that's germination. And so you can draw a picture. You could either draw this corn piece here for dormancy, or the bean here, and then for germination you could draw, you know, any of these stages here where it's starting to break through that seed coat and grow. Once the plant has started to grow, the active regions of growth in a plant are what we call meristems. On your booklet, page 5, under meristems, you should write region of growth, and then just draw an example of a plant. As that bean or corn develops further, this is where active growth is going to take place. The last thing we're going to address is vegetative reproduction. Plants can reproduce asexually or sexually, and everything we've talked about today so far has been forms of sexual reproduction where the sperm and the egg come together and fertilize and become a new organism. Vegetative reproduction or asexual reproduction in plants is when the plant grows a new plant from itself. So it's an asexual type of reproduction where non-reproductive parts are going to grow and become new plants. Here's an example of a plant going through vegetative reproduction. This is a strawberry. Strawberries, this is the main plant here, and you can see that the strawberry is shooting off these things called runners, or also known as rhizomes. And this is an example of the same thing down here. It's when the plant is going to spread and grow new plant life from itself. But it's an exact copy. The genetics are the exact same as the parent plant that it's coming from. Potatoes do the same thing. Onions do the same thing. A lot of plants go through vegetative reproduction. On your page 5, where it says vegetative reproduction, go ahead and just briefly define that, and then you can draw a couple pictures or write examples of some plants that go through vegetative reproduction. After that, if you would turn to page 6, there's a couple things that I want you to do there that just recap what we've been talking about. The first part says below, circle where pollination and fertilization would occur. So on the plant, just circle where's pollination happening, where's fertilization happening, and then down below that, see if you can identify what the fruit would be, what the seed would be, and where germination is happening. And that is our notes for today.